You're really distracting me down there in the kitchen. I have the feeling if I go down and tell you, you're gonna get mad, so I'm not gonna say anything, but you're gonna see this when you edit it. What was I saying? Hey everybody, Deathblade here with another Chinese fantasy novel FAQ, where I talk about, well, Chinese fantasy novels. Today I'm going to be talking about a kind of an odd topic. It's the brutality of the cultivation world. Now, if you are not familiar with these novels, I suggest you first check out the video, What are Chinese fantasy novels? I'm primarily talking about the Xianxia and Xianxia, which is the immortal cultivation and the Eastern cultivation fantasy novels. And I also recommend you check out the video, What is Cultivation, if you haven't already, because that's kind of important to understand what the cultivation world is. Now, I'm going to define the cultivation world really quickly. It's basically just the world of the people who practice cultivation, not a physical place like a planet or something. It's just referring to their society and their lives and action. I think this video is going to be particularly helpful for people who are not big fans of these novels. That said, I do have some opinions that I think fans will benefit from, and I would also like to hear your opinion in the comments. Before I get started, if you like the content that I make, please do like and subscribe, share the videos, comment, and if you are able to, you can support directly through Patreon. There's a link in the description below. Really appreciate that. Okay, let's get into the brutality of the cultivation world. A lot of people, when they hear about these cultivation novels but haven't really read them, I think they envision some kind of like transcendent, like peaceful world of like high-level Buddhist monks in robes and Taoists with long hair, contemplating the profundities of the universe and achieving these high levels of enlightenment. And although that's kind of true, the image of this like paradisaic, heavenly realm of enlightened beings is definitely not how most of these novels work. When I first started reading them, I was a little bit taken aback. I definitely remember one particular scene. It's from Stellar Transformations, which was actually the novel that kind of started this whole scene. And there was just one part in the very early parts of the novel where this immortal or some high-level person like comes down to the mortal world, and he just like snaps his finger or something, and like a whole bunch of people, like an entire street of people, all die. And he was just like, that's how strong I am, and then he like vanished. Something along those lines. And I remember being kind of taken aback and being like, dang, that's really, oh, what was that? I remember being taken aback and thinking, whoa, that's pretty hardcore. And that's basically how these cultivation novels work, for those of you who don't read them. The cultivation world is dog eat dog, law of the jungle, survival of the fittest. It's very hardcore. There's a large group of people competing for a very small set amount of resources to be able to rise through the ranks and become an immortal being or something higher than that. Now, in some of the novels, there are delineations between righteous and evil, but a lot of times that delineation is blurred because, again, in the end, most of the time, might makes right in these novels. Strength is respected because the people who are strong have the ability to enforce their will on other people. That's just how it is. Now, that doesn't mean that there is no right and wrong. There is right and wrong usually, and there are things that people tend to view as being taboo or not okay. For instance, in some of the novels, there's a line to be drawn going after people's friends and family. Like sometimes only the bad guy will do that, but not necessarily. For instance, in the novel that I'm currently translating, which is Sage Monarch, it has a particularly ruthless cultivation world in which it doesn't really matter if you're the good guy or the bad guy. If necessary, you will wipe out the clan of your enemy. You will, people cross you, you will kill them instantly without thinking about it. But that said, later in the novel, there actually are people who are like fully devoted to actual righteousness and not killing. So those people do exist within the context of even a very brutal cultivation world. And this whole concept of being ruthless and brutal ties into another video I kind of want to do at another time, which goes into why when I read stories written by Westerners that are supposed to take place in these cultivation settings, I tend to find them very, I don't want to say inauthentic, but they're very different from the usual authentic Chinese cultivation novels, because the Western writers tend to think that stuff is inappropriate or incorrect or something, and so they make their cultivation world more the way they would envision it from the Western perspective. So now let's get into a second sort of explanation for why these cultivation novels are so brutal. And that's not the in-world explanation of explaining it within the context of the story, but the out-world explanation, in other words, from the author perspective. So don't forget, these authors are Chinese, from mainland China, and China has a China is very different. Now, I know that's an obvious thing, you know, cultures are different and whatnot, but this is something that was really not, I don't think, hit home to me really until I was outside of Western culture and in Chinese culture for a long time. Now, historically speaking, it comes from a foundation of Confucianism, and then of course Taoism and Buddhism and other things, whereas the Western world has, you know, Judeo-Christianity, and then of course the Greek and Roman philosophies, kind of, that's the foundation of Western society, and there's very different outlooks on life. I think that's one factor that plays into it historically, and in the end, modern China is just very, it's kind of, I guess you could say it's kind of like the Wild West in a lot of ways. If you follow the news from China, you will see a lot of things that pop up that are just, I guess you could say, horrific. I literally just yesterday saw an article about cats being boiled alive for their fur and how this is a problem. And it's just a lot of really, really just, you know, brutal things that are relatively common in modern day China. So the authors are in that environment and they are writing their stories from that perspective. And the way the life in China goes, a lot of times for example, there's no real rule of law in China. Although there are policemen and there's a court system, it doesn't operate on the foundation of a body of law that is applied objectively, although, you know, obviously in the Western world that's the ideal. It doesn't necessarily work that way, but in China it's just not like that. In China, relationships matter more than the law, and I'm sure you have all seen various news articles about, you know, all kinds of bad things happening in China. Right now, literally as I'm recording this video, we're in this big thing with you know, the Hong Kong and China thing, and I don't want to get into political stuff on this channel, but the point is, you can see from the things that happen in China and the things that China is connected to, things just operate differently there. And so that's kind of a few thoughts I have about the brutality of the cultivation world. Again, people who are not familiar with the genre might go into it expecting the people to be striving toward an ideal that would be, you know, sort of reminiscent of the Christian heaven, where, you know, it's like angels singing and everyone's like happy and peaceful. But in reality, the novels tend to be, the higher you go, the more ruthless you need to be able to maintain control and make sure you don't get killed by somebody else who is trying to reach the top where you are eventually going to be yourself. So what is your perspective? Do you have any thoughts on it? Do you have any points you disagree with, or do you have any examples from novels that you've read that coincide with what I've said or maybe contradict it? Please do leave it in the comment section below. I'll try to get back to as many of the comments as I can. And again, please do like and subscribe. That's it for this video. I'll see you next time. Godsala.